Welcome, everyone. My name is Terrell Russell, and I lead the IRODS Consortium at the Renaissance Computing Institute, or RINC, at University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. And I'm also a member of the HEAL Data Stewardship Group. I want to thank you all for joining us today for the 12th installment of our Fresh Fair webinar series. Today's webinar is called New Year, New Policy, Crafting a HEAL-Compliant Data Management and Sharing Plan. And will feature a presentation providing an overview of data management and sharing plans, as well as lightning talks providing guidance for crafting your plan. We'll have some Q&A followed by a presentation on HEAL-specific data management and sharing plan resources and the different elements of the NIH data management plan template. If at any point you have any questions, please feel free to type it in the Q&A box, and that should allow you to get some answers. We're joined today by presenters Hannah Currin, Jen Darragh, Nina Exner, and Jim Martin. I'll introduce each of them real quick. Hannah Currin is a research data analyst at RTI International. She's experienced in clinical research recruitment and database management, having worked for over 4 years at the Carolina Institute for Developmental Disabilities, coordinating recruitment efforts for a variety of research studies and managing several recruitment databases maintained by the CIDD. She holds an ALA accredited degree in information science. She previously worked as the librarian for the Office of Air Quality Planning and Standards at the RTP campus of the EPA, and she's a member of the HEAL Data Stewardship Group and helps develop guidance for data management, curation, and strategy. Jen Darragh is a senior research data management consultant in the Center for Data and Visualization Sciences at Duke University Libraries, where she provides training and consulting services designed around the research data lifecycle, covering general best practices as well as special topics and tools. She also serves as one of the data curators for the research data program supported by the Duke Digital Repository. Prior to joining Duke University, she was the data services and sociology librarian at Johns Hopkins University and the social and behavioral sciences librarian at Virginia Commonwealth University, and the data archivist for the Population Research Institute at Penn State University. Throughout her career, she's gained particular expertise in the management, use, and archiving of sensitive social, behavioral, and health sciences data. Nina Exner brings more than 20 years of experience as a practicing librarian in academic and health sciences library to Virginia Commonwealth University Libraries. As the research data librarian, she brings to bear vast teaching interest and knowledge of best practices in managing research studies. She concentrates on graduate student and faculty support through teaching, consultation, scholarly communications, and collaboration with sponsored research professionals. Her expertise and teaching experience include grant writing, and her own research interests center around the organizational and informational effects of developing researchers. Jim Martin is a research services librarian at the University of Arizona Libraries Department of Research Engagement, specializing in data management practices and research data management tools. He also serves as the UA Libraries Liaison for the UA College of Optical Sciences, School of Geography, Development, Environment, and the College of Sciences Department of Astronomy, Computer Science, Geosciences, Hydrology and Atmospheric Sciences, Mathematics, Physics, and Planetary Sciences Lunar and Planetary Laboratory, or LPL. And with all of that, I will pass it over to Hannah to begin the presentation.
Thank you, Terrell. And as you can tell from those impressive resumes, we have a really great program for you today. We're very excited about it. And I just wanted to briefly go over today's objectives. So the overall goal of this presentation is really to give all of you a better understanding of the new NIH data management and sharing policy that's happening in January of 2023, so next month. And we have done a past presentation on data management and sharing plans that was more general, and I suggest that you go and look at that. And I also wanted to mention all of the links from the presentation today will be emailed out to attendees after the presentation. But that presentation was more general about data management and sharing plans, how they can be helpful, how to write them and craft them. And this presentation is going to be more about the policy itself, how to be HEAL compliant. And then I'm also kind of viewing it as a resource dump. So there's a lot of materials out there right now that can help you to be able to be compliant with this policy, but it's a lot of information to sift through. And we've kind of taken the time to compile that, I think, in a very useful way. And hopefully you'll be able to get some helpful information out of today. And then we also just want to express, that we're here to help. There's also other people in your communities, I'm sure, like academic librarians, if you're at an institution that are there to help you. So we're really just trying to do some information sharing and fostering a sense of community today. So we're going to start with an overview of the NIH data management and sharing plan template, just so that everyone has a similar foundation. We'll talk through the elements that are parts of that template. And then we're going to move into some lightning talks with librarians. And I'm very excited about this. Academic librarians are really in the forefront of data sharing and data management. They've created so many amazing tools, resources, for everyone, and having them talk today, I think they're going to be able to give some great insight into what they're hearing from researchers, the issues that people are having, the resources that they recommend. So that'll be an exciting talk, and then we'll have a chance to have a Q&A with them after that. So if you have questions that come up during their presentation, you can ask it then. And then the second half of this presentation is going to be more HEAL initiative focused. So how can you be HEAL compliant? What are the additional things that you need to do in order to be HEAL compliant on top of the data management and sharing policy? And then we'll wrap all of that up with a moderated panelist discussion and a Q&A. I also wanted to mention, I know a lot of people have been asking about different templates or tools for actually writing out DMPs, and we are going to talk about that at the end of the presentation, so stay tuned. So with the new year coming, and we've been doing the Fresh Fair webinar series for a year now, we thought what a better time to have a New Year's resolution of strengthening your data management and sharing plan, and also strengthening your knowledge of data management and sharing plans. So starting with a refresher, what is a data management and sharing plan? And a DMSP outlines management and sharing of scientific data, accompanying metadata, other relevant data, and associated documentation. And that can be a lot, but what it's going to do is help you think through the life cycle of your data that your study is generating, and it can benefit you in lots of different ways. So it can potentially improve your data quality. And we talked about this in the original presentation we did on data management and sharing plans. If you're building out a blueprint for a plan for a house, you're going to have a better chance of successfully building that house. And we want to make sure that you are able to plan for your information, how you're going to describe it, and how you're going to store and share it later on. It can also help you prepare for depositing your information into a repository. So if you know that your repository requires your data to be in a certain format, knowing that ahead of time is going to really save you time. And then it also helps because we can craft better resources to fit your needs. So if we, the HEAL stewards, are able to find out through your data management and sharing plans the types of data that you're going to be generating or your expectations, we can make better resources that will fit your actual needs moving forward. So here are the 6 elements of the NIH data management and sharing plan template. And we're going to dive into these later on and kind of get at the descriptions of them. But I just wanted to do a quick overview of them so that we would all be familiar with them before hearing the library lightning talks. So the first is data type. Then we have related tools, software, and/or code, standards, data preservation, access, and associated timeline, access, distribution, or reuse considerations, and oversight of data management and sharing. And with that, we are going to start the librarian lightning talks. And starting us off will be Jen Darragh from Duke University Libraries.
Okay, hi everybody. So perhaps one of the first important things, and we can go to the next slide, Mary Hannah, is that you got to understand the terminology that are in these sections and in the guidance that usually accompanies the templates for what you need to put in those particular fields. And some of these terms, are very familiar to librarians. It's something that we come in contact with a lot, but it's not necessarily something you come in contact with a lot. So I'm going to talk about each one of these in detail a bit more, and that includes metadata, curation, repositories, digital preservation, and data sharing. So you can go ahead to the next slide. So what metadata is the structured data about data. It's used by different disciplines and repositories to enable both findability of data, so basically using standardized vocabulary and record structures, kind of like we've seen a library catalog, or it can help data be more interoperable for analysis through harmonization of variables and values. So when they're talking about standards, this is some of what they're talking about. And there are many different kinds of standards. An example of a clinical data standard would be CDISC. An example of a general health data standard would be the NIH Common Data Elements. And an example of a repository-specific standard would be, for example, the NIM Data Archive. And finally, an example of a general standard that can be used for any data type and tends to lean more towards that findability aspect is Dublin Core. It's a good idea for you to get familiar with standards in your field, and also when you're selecting a repository, to see if there's a particular standard that you're supposed to follow. Adopting these standards early ensures less retrofitting at the end when the budget may already be spent out. We can go to the next slide. Okay, as a researcher, curation is kind of a loaded term, because obviously there are repositories that do curation, but researchers have to do a lot of this on their own. It's a partnership. It's the active and ongoing management of data through its life cycle of interest and usefulness to scholarship, science, and education, which includes appraisal and selection, representation and organization of these data for access, overuse, and time. So the ways that researchers can self-curate their own data, is making sure that your variables and values are clearly labeled and defined. Have you adequately explained your methods, your collection, your analysis, your cleaning, your weighting? Have I formatted my data in a way that is interoperable across platforms? Have I logically arranged my files and explained how they relate to one another if you have multiple files in a data set? And have I commented any of my code that I've done? If I'm using SPSS or SAS or Stata or R, have I commented it to explain exactly what it does? Okay, we can go to the next slide. So one of the things about repositories is that these are formal structures that they have the appearance of a web portal, but they offer a lot more on the back end for long-term preservation and access, such as different ways of preserving things, providing digital object identifiers, making sure that they're available in the different disciplines that people are involved in. And also that, there's some catch-alls that include generalist repositories like Dryad. One thing I will say is that Mary Hannah does have a list of HEAL recommended repositories for you all to consult, and this helps take a lot of that guesswork away. For folks who don't have that kind of help, this can be a lot more daunting because it can be a pretty broad landscape. We can go to the next slide. So the next term I want to clarify is about preservation. And the quote here is by Jeff Rothenberg, who was a former researcher at RAND, and he just said this back in 1999. And it's whether we like it or not, digital information is fragile. It can become corrupt from broken media, from benign neglect, from software obsolescence, system failure, etc. So preservation is an active long-term storage process as opposed to a static backup at one point in time. So like when you have your regular backups by computer departments, they're not necessarily doing the same level of backup that a repository is doing. They are ensuring that files are accessible over the long term by doing some or all of the following. And that includes performing checksums at fixity, migrating formats as they change, providing built-in emulation options at times, and by requiring open source originals or at least surrogates to ensure longevity of access. Preservation can sometimes, depending on the repository, be expensive, but it is worth it. When selecting a repository, any costs for preservation should be provided up front to allow you to add that into your budget. In addition, the repository should also indicate its plans for long-term preservation, retention, so how long they plan to keep the data, and plans in case of disaster or repository closure. You can typically find this in the policies or about section of the repository. Then we go to the next slide. So finally, this is the thing that I think has been a big shift for everybody. And when we're talking about data sharing, what we're really talking about is formal data publishing. This is what offers optimal data fairness, so that findability, accessibility, interoperability, and reusability. So basically, when you have informal data sharing that used to be, people would ask you for it, you'd give it to them. You might have a project website that you updated with files, and then sometimes just the static files that you would put with an article. What we're seeing now is more, they want it in a public repository. This is what NIH is wanting, an established public repository that basically follows standards and formats to make it possible for secondary reuse, and that it complies with your community's best practices for sharing. So with that, my little section is done, and I can turn it over to Nina.
Thank you, Jen. And next slide, Mary Hannah. So one of the challenges that we're running into is that in every element of the policy, it's a little difficult to tell what they're even asking for. Some of that is due to the technical terms that Jen has given a great overview of, some of the most challenging ones. But there are also, in some cases, very particular and yet still somehow managing to be vague terms, like the long but still difficult to work with definition of what they consider a data type. Some of this could be addressed in a lovely crowdsourced set of guidance that Hao Yi et al. Have been working on that includes mostly librarian-focused content, but some resources for researchers, and I've put some of the specific sublinks to those here. I especially recommend, if you've been a PI for a while or a research administrator or CRC for a while, the annotated example of shifting from the old DSP format to the new DMSP format. Next slide, please. A lot of the challenges can be addressed if you go ahead and check out and learn your repository, preferably before closeout when you're trying to finish your compliance. The general process of figuring out where your repository will be goes like this. First, does the FOA that you're responding to specify a repository? If so, you just stop the entire tree here, or the entire one-line flowchart. Is it a chart if it only has one line? I don't know. Stop the decision there, just use the one that's in the FOA, and go ahead and look in its guidance. But if the FOA, the funding opportunity announcement, doesn't specify a repository, then is there a repository that the institute, center, or office prefers? And for most of you here, that's going to be addressed by the HEAL repositories list. So that will be your main decision point. But some of you may be applying to programs other than HEAL as well. So I'm going to continue with next. Does your campus maintain an institutional data repository that might fit your needs? And then, if not, you can either attach your data that's related to an article to a PubMed Central article, public access article filing, or for the data that is not connected to an article, which one of the things about this policy is they want data that is not connected to articles as well as data that is connected to articles. You may consider a generalist repository, and I believe there are a couple of those in the HEAL list. I think I saw Vivly and Figshare on there. Although I personally, I think there are a lot of other good ones on the list as well, but which ones work best for HEAL, HEAL knows. So mostly you'll be in the second box. You should go ahead and check those NIH-supported disciplinary data repositories because they address a lot of the confusing parts of the guidance, like release timelines, the data and documentation formats, the standards that will be acceptable, whether restricted access is supported for as an approach to how to deal with sensitive data, and so on. Generalist repositories, on the other hand, will mostly depend on your format and how you arrange your data and documentation. That means that you can define what will work for your study, and you may end up more frequently saying there is no standard and we will use what works best for the data. That's the end of my talk, and I'll pass it on to Jim now.
Thank you, Nina. Because the policy is so new, I wanted to conclude the lightning talks by sharing a few ideas for staying up to date as new resources, new information about the plan is released by NIH. One of the best resources I found is the actual NIH DMSP FAQ. If you haven't already done so, highly recommend taking a look at it, maybe even bookmarking it. They put a lot of new information in here. It's very well organized. It's easy to search. So particularly as you begin writing a plan to meet these new requirements, there may be questions that come up, and you can refer to this as a resource that might help you address some of your concerns or issues that you're running into. I also want to note that the FAQ includes a few sample plans, which were often asked if plans are available for review. These are plans that have been vetted by NIH as examples, good examples. And although there are only a few in here right now, we're anticipating that as the plan people start writing more of these plans and NIH has more of a chance to review them and vet them, they'll be providing more good examples of data management plans that address these new requirements. Next slide, please. There's also a great way to stay up to date with the news and events that are related to the NIH DMSP. There's the NIH Scientific Data Sharing Announcements listserv that you can subscribe to. So this provides information from NIH about new resources that are available. There have been supplements released to this policy since it was first announced, and they announced those through this as well. And there are also a lot of really good seminars and other events, webinars, recordings, and other educational materials that they announce through this listserv as they become available. So it's a great way to stay up to date. Next slide, please. And then finally, I just wanted to note that NIH has created a draft of what they're calling the DMSP Fillable format page. While this is still in draft form, it's something to keep an eye on in terms of it might be helpful as you start writing your data management and sharing plan to address these new requirements. We're expecting and anticipating that a final version will be released very soon. It said fall 2022, but we're almost past that date. So we're hoping any day now to release a final version of this. And it just might be something you take a look at in terms of being able to use this fillable format page to write the requirements for your new DMSP. Again, hopefully they'll announce this through that listserv that I mentioned previously. And that concludes my section. I'll pass it back to Mary Hannah for the Q&A.
Great. Thank you so much, Jim. And I'll invite the panelists to turn their cameras on at this point, and we will start asking questions. So if you do have questions, there's a Q&A box in the chat on your screen, and you can submit them there. We'll try to get to as many as we can in this period of time and then revisit later on at the end of the presentation. So our first question is, how is NIH engaging with librarians so librarians can help engage with researchers? And I will point the first question to Jen. Or to anyone, if anyone has any opinions on that.
Well, there's certainly been on the, I'll jump in here. There's certainly been in a lot of the professional associations. We have, just like researchers do, we have our own meetings and talks where we go together. There have also been a number of discussion groups where librarians, especially those who are closely involved with data preservation, have been trying to work on support tools. And in a number of those, we've had staff from either the National Library of Medicine or the Office of Data Science Services, I think ODSS, I'm sorry, can't remember the exact details, have been sitting in and listening to what our concerns are in order to try to figure out what their responses are.
I'll just add to that they have been reaching out, and I think mainly partly through the National Library of Medicine. They've been wonderful partners that they reached out to some of us. I'm also a member of the Data Curation Network, which is a consortial group that provides shared data curation infrastructure across several institutions. And we teach how to curate data. And we did a webinar that was sponsored by NIH, and we geared it toward program officers, but really anybody could come, that just said what they really should be looking for in data management plans, and how they can also help you. How can they, when you don't know what repository to use, do they know what might be the best place to find these things, so that they are active partners in this as well.
Thank you. And I attended that webinar. It was excellent. So I highly recommend, if people are looking for more resources, to go and look into that. The second question is, does this new DMSP fillable form integrate with the NIH repositories? Is anyone aware? I do believe the fillable form is still being developed. I don't think it's accessible on the website yet. I believe it's just a draft at this point. So I'm not sure, but if you do want to, we can look into that after the presentation and see if we can find an answer.
Yeah, I don't think that it does. I think it's literally just a template. I know that NINA works with the DMP tool on making sure that its templates are up to snuff, with wonderful guidance too, by the way, for filling out each of those sections of the plan. So I would say that's another option. That's a little bit more, I guess, machine actionable in a way, and they continue to beef that up that way. But I don't know any that like directly integrate with a repository.
Yes, and we'll talk about the DMP tool later as well. It's an excellent tool. The third question is, can we use the DMSP that was submitted in the funded grant, or do we need to compile a different one? And I think maybe this is getting at either possibly submitting it with the stewards. So I think what you want to do with your data management and sharing plan is make sure that it's reflecting your research study as it changes. So if you did submit one with your application, obviously that is wonderful. If you have changes that have happened and want to submit one to the stewards so that we have updated information, we would love that. And I hope that gets at the question, but does anyone have a different interpretation or follow up to that?
I can add a little bit that might also address one of the open questions about submitting on 27th. The 6 main elements are going to stay consistent because they are policy. The subsections that are in the fillable draft that's in the current Forms H release, if you're following really detailedly on what the SFS, what the form set looks like, those subsections might be broken out slightly differently, I suppose, but the 6 main sections that were addressed at the beginning, that's safe for January 27th. And it's safe for anything that you draft at this point, because those 6 elements have to be covered for everyone.
Okay, great. And just to go back and read that question out for those not looking at the Q&A, this question that Nina just addressed was, I'm submitting my NIH grant on January 27th. Is it safe to use this data management and sharing draft to write my plan? So thank you for addressing that question. And another question is there a standard timeline for sharing data? Many PIs publish on a rolling basis. Do they decide when they are ready, or are they held to a timeline following the close of the study?
Yes, you do have some requirements with that. Basically, you need to share your data as soon as you publish on it, meaning that whatever data is associated with that paper, they expect you to publish. Or say you have a longitudinal data set that you might be writing lots of papers on, perhaps that entire data set is released once the project is closed. So it's basically, there can be incremental parts that are published over time, but they're supposed to be pretty close to when the article comes out. And you'll find most journal publishers are going to ask you to do this anyway. And then at the end of the grant, if you have something that's worthwhile to share, that's more of a comprehensive set, then they would want you to do that at close of project, or in the case that you get a no cost extension, once that no cost extension is over.
Thank you so much, Jen. And I'll add, I think there's really great language included in the FAQs on the sharing NIH.gov website on that particular timeline question that reflects what Jen just covered. So the last question is, considering all the involved parts, what is your estimate for the total number of hours going into developing a DMP? 1, before the data is collected, and 2, throughout the lifetime of the project? I think this is kind of an open-ended question because it'll depend. It'll depend on the research study. But I don't know. Do you have maybe an example study that you've seen where you've heard about the amount of time they had to put into it?
Since the NIMH data archive is one of your options for the HEAL compliant repositories, they actually have a tool, a spreadsheet for trying to estimate how much time the data preparation and filing might take for that. Now, that's very specific to that repository because they have a lot of close standards that require a lot of extra work. But that could, as far as the data management and sharing, could be a place to get an estimate. For the DMP itself, I think writing the DMSP probably only takes about an hour once you are familiar with the standards and the repository and so on. That part could take a while digging through that documentation. Then, because through the lifetime of the project, you can adjust your DMSP during each annual RPPR, you have the opportunity to tweak it at the same time you do the rest of your annual reports. And I would estimate another maybe hour or 2 to talk to your team, if you have a team, if you have a postdoc, and ask, here's what we filed last year or 2 years ago when we submitted. What about that is no longer accurate and we need to change?
Yeah, beyond that, if you're thinking about the actual activities that you have to plan or perform that you talked about in a DMP, that can vary broadly and widely. So just because, and I would always say when it comes to this, like Nina's talking about, that you do have chances to revise and iterate, during RPPR, and you also do it just in time as well, that you make the changes you want to make, and that you always tend during that year period, try quarterly or something like that, to kind of go back to look at your plan and say, are we on track? Are we doing what we said we were going to do? Just to keep everybody neat and tidy. It's definitely not meant to be a document that you just do once and never look at again. It really is supposed to also help be a tool for you to help keep things moving smoothly.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And with that, we'll wrap up the Q&A so panelists can turn their cameras off. And thank you all so much for your input and excellent answers. And if we did not get to your question, we'll have another chance to revisit it at the end of this presentation. So now for our more HEAL-focused part of the presentation, guiding you to a HEAL-compliant data management and sharing plan. So first I want to go over exactly, what does HEAL compliant mean? So the HEAL stewards developed a step-by-step guide for HEAL compliant data that we have linked here. And it has steps that a researcher should take after receiving their award. And it includes a lot of things. Some examples are registering your study on clinicaltrials.gov. Another example would be selecting your data repository from the list of compliant repositories. And this guide is aligned with the HEAL public access and data sharing policy and includes steps like sharing your DMSP with the HEAL stewards and registering your study on the HEAL platform. So with the implementation of this new NIH 2023 policy, we wanted to provide some additional steps and sort of revisit this step-by-step guide with recommendations for researchers. So under these policies, HEAL applicants generating scientific data are required to submit a data management and sharing plan at the point of application. And that might include selecting a repository a little earlier than you had originally done. And with the step-by-step guide, that has, it's sort of a checklist with resources, and that's how we wanted to craft this presentation. We wanted to step through the different elements of the data management and sharing plan and talk about what our recommendations are for you and what resources we have available. So taking a step back and thinking about the general NIH guidance, NIH describes these data management and sharing plans as a new foundation. So based on your data type, you might have additional requirements that you need to meet, or based on your IC. One example would be with HEAL studies, we ask that you select a HEAL compliant repository to deposit your information in. And there are a lot of great resources on the NIH website about this sort of foundational block that you need to meet. So one of them is planning and budgeting for a data management and sharing plan. And I think that question about time kind of got into a little bit of that, but you want to make sure that you budget time and money to create these plans and also revisit them in the future. And this includes guidance for applications for receipt dates before and after the policy change. So you can look on NIH's website and kind of see, what was this like before? What is it now? How is it different? And the website also includes resources for other data specific policies. So like that genomic data sharing policy that I mentioned before. So let's walk through the 6 template elements, and we'll do a summary of each element and then talk through sort of either the HEAL recommendations or resources associated with each one. And the first 2 are related to that list of compliant repositories. So data type is the first element, and that's types and anticipated amounts of scientific data. Plans for preservation, so what you're going to keep. Metadata and tools that will help with interpretation of your data. So all of this is going to help inform your selection of a repository. And we have lots of different repositories in the list. Some are generalist, some are data type specific. So based on what your data type is, that will help inform which repository might be best for you. And stewards also do consultations with PIs all the time to help them think about what repository might be best. So we are here to help with that as well. Related tools, software, and/or code. So what's needed to access your information? We suggest that your information be broadly accessible, and I think this kind of leans into that idea of your information being fair and reusable. And this can be facilitated by your selection of repository and making your information accessible in the future. Standards. I know Jen already mentioned standards. So any common data standards being used for your data or metadata is the summary of this element. And there are a few things to keep in mind for HEAL researchers. So new HEAL pain clinical studies must submit their case report forms and questionnaires to the Common Data Elements program. And we have the link here. Again, for those joining late, all of the links from this presentation will be emailed out to attendees afterwards. And the program will provide CDE files. HEAL clinical studies need to obtain licensing for any copyrighted questionnaires and present them to the CDE program and their program manager before proceeding with the study process. Awardees also must register on the HEAL platform and submit metadata to CEDAR within 1 year of their award. And if you have any questions about study level or variable level metadata, please reach out to the HEAL stewards, and our contact form is at the end of this presentation. Another element is data preservation, access, and associated timelines. So what repository will you use for your data, how your information will be findable and identifiable, and how long the information will be accessible. Again, this gets back to the HEAL compliant repository list. So you want to indicate your anticipated repository, and that's something that you'll want to update if you end up changing it down the road. And then also make your information accessible as soon as possible. And this gets at what Jen was talking about with timelines. You need to do it before the point of publication or before the end of the or at the end of the activity. So access, distribution, or reuse considerations. These are factors affecting these categories: access controls, protections for human research participants. So in conjunction with human subjects, data protections, we recommend making as much data as shareable as possible and using broad data sharing consent language, and NIH has a great resource linked here. You'll also want to consider appropriate privacy protections and whether or not information should be de-identified. There's also great information about that in the NIH sharing website FAQs. They talk about different privacy considerations. And then we also have a link to human participant guidance. And then oversight of data management and sharing. So your plan for compliance and who will be monitoring this. And for this, I think you can kind of think back to that step-by-step HEAL guide for compliant data. And you'll probably want to include more information, especially about who's going to be monitoring. But some of the steps in that guide, I think, can help you plan out, what you need to do in order to comply with data management and sharing. And here we have additional guidance and resources. So there is a lot of material out there. Again, we are happy to sift through it with you to think about what might be most helpful. But I think as this policy is implemented, like Jim mentioned, there are existing examples and resources, but I'm sure that that is going to grow over time as people settle into this new policy change. So are there tools for generating a DMSP? And I know a lot of people have been interested in this. So we do have the NIH template that Jim already mentioned, and the forthcoming Fillable template. That's sort of a do-it-yourself, but it's a great resource, I think, to just look at all of the elements on a page, see them all laid out, and think about them easily. Another tool that was also mentioned earlier is DMP tool, and we looked through lots of different resources for creating a data management and sharing plan. There are a lot out there, but we really liked DMP tool for a lot of different reasons. One is that they have a template for the new NIH policy. I think right now it's forthcoming 2023. And it allows you to step through the elements of the plan with guidance and examples. So Nina is actually on the committee that helps craft this, which is really awesome. And it's extremely easy to walk through. And I think a great way to take it step by step and think through your plan. And then you can also publish your document as a PDF as part of this tool. We recommend that you share it with the stewards if possible. You can either do that by emailing us the PDF or listing us as collaborators. This will just help us to get a better picture of the landscape of HEAL data, and we can kind of talk about that more later. But I know you're submitting it to NIH. HEAL stewards are able to consult with researchers because we have a good idea of the HEAL data landscape. And as that continues to grow and change, these data management and sharing plans are just going to be really essential, I think, points of information that will show us what people are expecting their data to look like and where they're expecting to maybe deposit it. So it's always helpful for us to have some additional insight. And then we also recommend, if you use this tool, to register your plan for a DMP ID, and that's a persistent identifier that can be issued on DMP tool that enables versioning. So like we talked about, if you're going back and revisiting these plans, like you should be, it's very useful to have versioning because you can update it over time and have a record of how it's changed. So in summary, this is what we wanted you to take away. So make your data management and sharing plan useful for your study. We hope that you see this more than just a checkbox, but we also know that you are extremely busy with your studies. So If you walk away with anything, know that there are people out there that would love to help you. The HEAL stewards included. If you're part of an institution, there are academic librarians who are there to help you. There are a lot of people who I think are familiar with these policies and familiar with resources who are able to focus their time and energy on that. So we would love to help consult with you and walk you through the process. Update your DMSP as your study changes, like we've already mentioned a few times. Sharing your plan with the HEAL stewards can help us to help you. We did an initial data asset inventory to get an idea of the HEAL landscape. And since we've done that, and even since we had the last data management and sharing plan presentation, the landscape of HEAL studies has just grown exponentially, which is incredible. But it helps us to get insight through your data management and sharing plans so that we can continue to craft resources and materials that are going to impact you in the most beneficial way. Prepare for the new policy change in 2023. I hope that we've done that a little bit today. And NIH and HEAL have resources for you. So if you need any additional help or guidance, please reach out to the HEAL stewards. We are here to help. And now we will go into the moderated panel discussion. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, but I'll ask that all of the panelists share their cameras, and we'll start reviewing some questions. Great, thank you. So I'll start with the first moderated discussion question, which is, why should HEAL investigators share their data management and sharing plans with the stewards? I think I've already kind of gotten at this, and it's more so just to make sure that we have a better idea of the HEAL landscape and that we can craft materials that are catered directly to you, whether that be based on data type or the repository that you're planning on selecting. We want to make sure that we are crafting up-to-date materials that are impactful and useful. The next question I will direct to Nina, which is, why should HEAL investigators care about submitting data management and sharing plans?
Well, from a totally practical point of view, it's required. So that may be a little squishy as they roll it out, but it's required, and it'll be more and more strictly enforced as they go. On a more improving science note, though, NIH is really trying to push for a culture change where we do science like we're in a digital environment with computers and stuff, and we engage in prospective planning for our data and our analyses instead of ad hoc data cleaning that can sometimes cause computer-driven inaccuracies to filter into the study. And so they're really trying to encourage all the processes that are needed to work with our data throughout for reproducibility and removing the disappearance of null findings from the literature and all kinds of other kinds of like betterment of science practices.
Thank you. The next question I'll direct to Jim, and that is, what kind of feedback or review will there be for these plans once submitted to NIH?
So NIH program staff will do the actual evaluation of the data management plan that's submitted as part of the grant application. They'll make sure that each of the elements have been reasonably addressed and that the plan is acceptable overall. Peer reviewers will have a chance to look at the budget section of the data management and sharing plan, and we'll see the budget justification section and can provide comments on that component. But they won't be evaluating the overall plan itself. That's up to the NIH program staff.
Thank you, Jim. And another question I'll direct to Jen. how would you define a finite study that requires an individual DMP, say several projects under one grant?
Sure. So this almost goes back to what I was talking about with longitudinal data, but it doesn't necessarily have to be longitudinal. It could just be a multi-pronged study, something like that. Basically, the way I've always tried to look at this, and I'm a very visual person, is think of the grant as the umbrella. You know, that's what covers all of the research that's being conducted in that area, but you might have different data products, different data sets, different things like that. So the one thing to remember about data management and sharing plans is they're 2 pages. So they know that you can't be exhaustive, but you want to be as descriptive as you possibly can. And of course, again, you can make changes at, RPPR and regular time intervals. So I would say, it's okay with some of the data types and things like that to you don't have to list discrete data sets, but you could be like, we're going to have these types of results, and we're going to have these types of results, and we're going to have these types of results. And it's more important to kind of get that more 10,000 foot view than necessarily being super nitty gritty.
Thank you. All right, I'm going to move into our Q&A. So our first question is, will you offer specific templates for data sharing plans for different kinds of studies, such as behavioral versus medical versus neuroimaging versus with or without biosamples, et cetera? And I think that, or I know that NIH has this data management and sharing policy that's foundational. So they have the general plan, and then there might be supplementary things that are included later on that ICs might be developing. As far as HEAL, we do not have specific templates aside from what's already required from NIH. Not sure how things might evolve down the road, but for now we are leaning to NIH's recommendation. So using that regular template and then doing any supplementary plans that you might need to do based on your data type. And that can be found on NIH's website. But if you have questions about finding out what is applicable to your study, please feel free to reach out to the stewards. But I'll open that question to others because they might have other insights into data type specific plans for the future.
I think a lot of PIs and research administrators are really looking for templates that a particular initiative or program has said, this is a good way to do this. The way that over time we evolved to having several examples from different institutes and centers from the DSP, the sort of 1 paragraph format. So, I don't know that that could come from anyone other than HEAL. I think those will accumulate over time as the institutes get a better sense of what they do and don't like out of the different approaches that that principal investigators take. But they're still getting a sense of what's going on, is the rumor anyway, of how PIs will respond. Until they see PI input, they're not going to know exactly how they want to respond. And so depending on which you, if they mean you in the HEAL sense, which you addressed, or you in the general NIH sense, I think on the NIH side, and this is not an official NIH word, this is just my personal opinion, I think those will emerge, but very gradually.
Thank you, Nina. The second question is, so is it mandatory to share the DMSP with the HEAL stewards? Are you the HEAL stewards, the 4 of us, or what is the turnaround for feedback? So I know that all of us have the NIH HEAL logo above us. I am on the HEAL stewards team. The others panelists today are academic librarians at different institutions who are blessing us with their presence. But the HEAL stewards team is primarily made of a team from UNC Chapel Hill, known as RENCI, and RTI International, a research institute also located near Chapel Hill. And we are in charge with making sure that researchers are able to effectively manage and share their data. and we act as a consultancy for PIs. So it is not mandatory to share your DMSP with us. You do need to submit it to NIH with your application. So we would love to see your data management and sharing plan if you would like to share it with us, because it helps us create better resources for researchers, but it is not a mandatory action. And there will not be turnaround for feedback. So I'm not sure about the turnaround for NIH feedback. I'll pass it to Nina.
Well, can I ask, will the stewards, if they're given a DMSP before submission of the proposal, would the stewards give feedback on a DMSP?
I do not
Or do
think
you
that
just want them after the fact?
I would have to check. I think if someone had a question, if they were maybe submitting an application and had a question, they could reach out. Yes, but there will not be a formal review process that I know of now. We have not discussed that, but that could be a potential discussion in the future. But NIH is the one you need to submit it to, and then we would love to see it, the stewards, once you've received your award, and we would be happy to consult on any changes.
The steps in that the site that you gave that had started with share as your DMSP and so on, that's all post-award stage steps, yes?
Yes, and there will be some new updated steps in compliance with the new NIH policy to come. We plan to have a similar roadmap for that in the future. So that order might be shifted a bit, but yes, that is post-award, the step-by-step guide. So the third question is, how will preclinical data be dealt with? And that's the final question. Is anyone aware?
Preclinical data is dealt with like any other data. That could mean so many things. Jen, Jim, I hope if you have thoughts on this that you'll add them in. But basic sciences in a lot of cases tends to be a little bit more spreadsheet driven. So there may and structured the way that the lab, the wet bench process or the lab's team processes may run. So that may in some cases be more suitable to a generalist repository. Well, as a HEAL steward, what would you normally expect for like a rat addiction model data to come into your repos like?
Yeah, and we are sort of up on time, but I think that if you need consultation on repository selection, dependent on what your actual data type is, please feel free to reach out to the stewards, and we would love to have a quick discussion with you, and we can help you match it to a repository if that's what you're interested in. And I just want to take the opportunity to thank all of our panelists. All of you have been incredible. Loved having your presentations today. I think they're all very useful. And I will pass it over to Terrell to wrap us up.
Yes. So yes, just like Mary Hannah said, thank you to all our presenters, I guess, and panelists. You were one of the same. So Mary Hannah, Jen, Nina, and Jim. In addition to our presenters and panelists, we'd like to acknowledge the behind the scenes team listed here who worked diligently to bring the webinar to production. Thank you very much. And thank you to the audience for your participation in today's webinar. We hope that you were leaving with a better understanding of preparing your data management and sharing plans. In addition to a recording of this webinar, we will also email everyone who has registered for this event a list of the resources that were shared. They'll assist you as you participate more deeply in the HEAL ecosystem. That includes this slide deck, a link to our Slack channel, and a Connect with Us form. Those are all located in the chat as well. We hope that you will reach out to us for questions or support as you embark on your fair journey to maximize the value of HEAL data. And finally, we look forward to seeing you at our next webinar in January. Registration details will be probably in your inbox soon. Please check out the last HEAL Data Platform office hours of the year on December 7. It's next Wednesday for help registering your study. Details will also be shared in today's follow-up email. Have a wonderful afternoon, everyone. Thank you.